friends, good afternoon. Come and sit down with me and don't leave too soon. Thank you for stopping in, thanks for saying hi. Together we can make a difference if we try. Thanks for saying hi. Together we can make a difference if we try. Hello there, my lovely friends. Good afternoon. Come and sit down with me and don't leave too soon. Thank you for stopping in. Thanks for saying hi. Together we can make a difference if we try.
Hello everyone, welcome into a special Sunday afternoon conversation. I am your host, Joe Schmo, and it's good to see everybody in chat. We have a special guest today. We have a special guest that I met at Lori's trial, actually at jury selection, and he's graciously agreed to come on the channel and to talk about this trial, maybe talk a little bit about the trial where he was juror number 18 in Idaho for her murder trial. And he has also written a couple of books around Chad and Lori and detailing some of his experiences in the trial. So we're happy to welcome aboard juror number 18, Tom Evans. Tom, welcome aboard.
Hey, Joe.
Hey, my friend. I say my friend, and we've only known each other a week, but I feel like that's what this trial in this case does.
It definitely does. Yeah, I've made a lot of friends, a lot of really close friends over sitting through 3 trials.
Wow. So you sat through Chad's trial also then?
I did every day, right up until the verdict, actually. The day of the verdict, I had a commitment to be in Nashville for the release of my book. So we were actually sitting on the airplane, taking off, watching the verdict happen on our phones. It was kind of a surreal moment.
After being there every day and then missing that.
Yeah.
Oh my. Yeah, it's a unique experience.
Yeah, it definitely is.
But you guys started as a juror. So let's go back to before the Idaho trial. You're just a regular everyday citizen living in Ada County, Idaho.
No idea what I was in for. I hadn't paid much attention to this case. I knew who Lori Vallow was. I think I was confusing this case with another case where there had been I think it was a boy that came up missing in a campground or something, and I don't remember, they found him dead or something. It's been a long time. So that's how much I knew. It wasn't much. I could recognize Lori, but that was about it going in. And I didn't even know, when I was called in, I didn't know what trial it was for until a few days in. Then I realized, I just thought it was business as usual at the Ada County Courthouse, and they brought, jurors in for different trials or whatever. And I didn't realize all the groups were all for this one trial. There were so many people there.
So there was a good sized jury pool.
Yeah, I think it was like 2,000 people in the end.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. But I didn't know. I just thought they were called in for different trials or whatever. I just wasn't paying that much attention. I thought I was going to go serve whatever this was and get out of there.
Right. So how long did that trial last?
I think my time was 7 weeks, but that includes jury instructions. I think the trial was 5. Can't remember exactly, but I think it was 5 weeks of testimony.
Wow. And so you just had to basically give up everything in your life for 5 weeks. I mean, you guys weren't sequestered, right? You got to go home every night.
Right. We weren't sequestered. We might as well have been, just about, other than getting to go home at night. We had to meet. There would be an undisclosed parking lot, and they changed it a few times during the trial, or once during the trial we had to drive to, and we were picked up in vans by armed guards, driven to the courthouse into the basement, and then other armed guards met us there and took us up the elevator into the jury room. So we were pretty tightly watched.
Wow. That's like a completely different situation than the current trial, right?
Yeah. Well, and at first I thought, I didn't know anything about it, and I thought it was because we were in some kind of danger. This was a murder trial. I told my wife to lock the doors when I wasn't home and kind of watch what was going on around her. And one thing I noticed, we live in a really quiet neighborhood. It's a cul-de-sac, and nobody comes in there for no reason. And there would be a cop car parked just down the road from our house. And, I was wondering about that. But I came to realize over time that it was just that they were trying to keep us separated from the media more than anything. And I didn't know who the people in the gallery were either. I didn't know who Larry was. I remember coming home one night, and I couldn't really talk about the trial, but we could talk about general things. And I just told Susan, I don't know, there's this guy in the gallery that looks a little fierce. Just, don't worry about that guy. He's a good guy. Because she knew, she was watching everything.
Right.
Now I know Larry really well. Know what a great guy is, and he is fierce, right? He's there for JJ and Justice and for everybody, really, but
right.
Also very anguished and determined to see this through.
Yeah, absolutely. So over that 5 to 7 weeks, how did your experience evolve, or how did your opinion of everything, Lori and the facts around the case, and as all of those were presented to you, how did your opinion change over time?
Yeah, I love that question because my experience started out nothing but dark and depressing, and I didn't want to be there. But it changed over the course of the trial. About halfway through, I started to realize that actually I was a part of something that was, the court system worked really well in Idaho. The police that were involved, that were testifying during the case, I could tell that they were really doing a top-notch job. I hadn't, of course, gotten to know any of the family. I did get to see them testify. And I just, over time, I instead of just wanting to be out of there and wishing I wasn't there, it kind of turned from that to, I started to be proud of what I was taking part in. Because we went through all the COVID years and all the violence and, letting prisoners out of jail and, letting criminals off without convicting them or without jail time or whatever. That's what we've been experiencing in this country going into that trial. And what I saw was the opposite of all that. I saw the justice system at work, doing a really thorough and really good job.
Wow. So you get to the end of that trial, 3 guilty verdicts, 3 life sentences. Were you still an alternate juror at the end?
Yeah, so the way that works is there were 6 alternates. Everybody had seen it through, all 18 jurors, to the end. But right before the jury was to go into deliberations, after closing arguments, all that happened, they randomly pulled numbers out of a hat. And mine was the first one pulled. And
as an alternate.
As an alternate. Yeah, so I had to walk out of that courtroom. And, as much as I know it's not about me, it felt unfair in the moment. And I really wanted to see, I was thoroughly convinced at that point that she was guilty, and I wanted to make sure that I wanted to see that through, but I didn't.
So
get
you
to.
didn't. Did you get to go into deliberations?
No,
You
we
didn't. Oh,
got
that's
to,
interesting. Because
yeah,
like in the Karen Reed case, I believe there was a juror that was dismissed during deliberations.
right.
So if there was an alternate that got plugged in there in the middle of that and hadn't been involved in the deliberations up to that point, that could have been a problem.
Yeah, we
Interesting.
were very strongly admonished not to talk about anything until after the verdict, and invited to leave the courthouse. So
Wow.
me and the others went and had a drink.
Okay. Probably deserved one at that point.
We needed it by that time for sure.
All right. Hey, thanks for your 7 weeks. We don't need you anymore. Go away.
But I did get invited back for the verdict, and they provided a seat for whatever jurors wanted to come back, and so that was
wow.
nice. Yeah,
That's
and
cool.
my wife got to come for that too, so that was good.
Nice. So what prompted you then to write a book about your experience?
Yeah, so when the trial was over, I had so many questions, and like I said, I'd experienced so much good in that trial that I was contemplating it for a while. I thought, there's really a story to tell here, and it really needs to be told. I wanted to tell the story of the good that I saw, and I also wanted to tell some of the background as to how we got to a point where a mother could murder her children and feel perfectly okay about it, because there's a lot there. There are reasons behind these beliefs, and I thought that was important. But for a while, I thought I wasn't going to write a book, because I thought the high road for a juror would be just to move on with your life and not make it about you. But between the end of the trial, between the verdict and the sentencing, there was a couple of months, and I thought about it. By the time of the sentencing, I determined I'm going to write this book. I felt like the actual high road in this case would be for me to write this book, because I knew so much about the background, the history of the Mormon Church and the fundamentalist Mormon Church, and all these different things I've studied for so long, that it just felt like, I'm the guy to tell this story, so I'm going to do it.
So this book isn't just about the trial. It also goes into the reasons, and that's a huge connecting point for me that I'm still a little bit foggy on. So I guess I need to read your book. But how does a woman like Lori Vallow Daybell end up being okay with what she did to JJ and Tylee? And I don't know how much involvement she had with Tammy, but obviously she got convicted of that too.
Yeah.
But just what happened to JJ and Tylee is absolutely horrific.
Yeah.
And she's supposed to be a good Mormon mom type person.
Right. So I've spent 2 years writing 2 books trying to answer that question in a way that makes some sense. And I'm not quite there yet. I'm still working on it, but I'm getting there. It starts all the way back in the history of the church. And it's not to say that it's the fault of the Mormon Church in any way, but they used Mormon doctrine. They twisted scripture and doctrine to their own advantage. And more than that, they believed this stuff. They still do. They still believe this stuff. They believe they are translated beings. They believe that they speak to God, and they believe they have a right to decide who lives and dies. And they believe that, sending these people to heaven probably is doing them a favor. And so how do you get to that point where you can believe those things is the question you're asking me. And it's just not an easy answer.
That's heavy stuff. That's really heavy, because we heard about translated beings on Thursday with Serena Sharp on the stand.
Yeah, boy, I really didn't want to go to a break in that moment. I wanted to continue on with that. It was about to get really interesting, I think.
Yeah, I agree. That was the one where the judge said, "Are you sure you want to open that door?" Oh, no. That was the one with Nancy Joe.
Yeah, right. You're right. That was earlier. But yeah, that was about to get really interesting, because I think she was about to say, "I am a translated being," and try to convince the jury of that.
Whew.
That would have been awesome.
Yeah, right? That would be instant meme worthy right there.
Yeah, yeah.
So right before this trial started, you released a new book, More About Chad.
Yeah.
Religious Zealotry, Mormon Fundamentalism, and Murder in Idaho. So tell us a little bit about that, your second book that was just released.
Okay, so I half of the book is about the trial, Chad's trial. I spent every day there. I've watched it. So I kind of go through some of the more interesting parts of that trial, but I also go back in history a little bit and do some background. Again, trying to explain how we get to a place where we got to. A little bit of Chad's history, his years growing up. I read his books. I read some of his books. I read some of all of his books, parts of all of his books. I read his whole autobiography and some others. And I really got into Visions of Glory by John Pontius. I studied that thoroughly, and I give a lot of background on that because it kind of explains their belief system, I think.
Well, tell us a little bit about your diving into Visions of Glory, because that's been a curiosity to me too. I actually downloaded it electronically. I haven't gotten into reading it yet. I wanted to do some deep dives into that, but maybe you can kind of draw the connection for us.
It's just it's such a huge book in the Mormon world, and so many people read it, and I think they take it as scripture, and that's where they go wrong. I don't know if it was meant to be scripture or not. Scripture meaning the Word of God. The author says it's not. That's not his intention, but it's written in such a way that if you're believing this stuff, then you're believing that it is the Word of God that he's writing. And it just talks about translated beings, the second coming, really about zombies, people invading your body. If you're an alcoholic, or you go into a bar even, or you're into pornography or whatever, then you're opening yourself up to some kind of, I don't remember if they called them zombies or what, but some kind of beings being able to inhabit your mind. There's actually one section of the book where he talks about he's standing in a bar, watching the patrons up at the bar, drinking, and the drunker they got, the more open they became to the spirits entering their bodies, and they would rip their skulls open and invade their minds that way. It's kind of bizarre, but also the main characters' interactions with Jesus at the time of the second coming and what that was like. It goes into pretty detailed. So this guy, Spencer, I think his name was. I can't remember all the details, but he was on his deathbed thinking that his life was over, and he had these dreams, and this book is supposed to be what his dreams were.
So almost like visions.
Yeah, exactly like visions. They were his visions and what he experienced.
Well, we know that Lori had a copy of Visions of Glory, and it was dog-eared and it was highlighted, and she probably treated that as scripture.
Yeah, the first time I saw that was in her video when they came and served her, right, when she was in Hawaii by the pool with Chad. And I saw that book, and I didn't know anything. I'd never heard of the book before. But I thought, oh, that's appropriate. Lori's sitting there reading some religious book, Right. But then it turns out it was a lot deeper than even that. So
yeah, some fringe religious book.
Yeah.
So on that topic, and I know you don't want to come at the LDS Church, but so I'm going to pose this as I have several times on my channel. I grew up LDS. I have a lot of friends and family that are LDS that are very good people. They love their family. They love the Lord. And there are people that will say, well, that's not the Jesus I worship. I'm like, okay, but my point is there are also these fringe cult groups that sprout from the LDS Church, and drawing that connection for me is a powerful connection, because once you start down the slippery slope of believing things that are outside of common beliefs, that are outside of the realm of logical thinking, then the next step is to believe something that's a little more outside of that, and then a little more outside of that. And then you wind up deep into visions of glory, and then we get Chad and Lori.
That's where these fringe groups pop up, right? The answers that the church doesn't have. People like Chad claim to have those answers, and that's how they gain their followers.
So you released your book right before the trial, right?
Yeah, just a couple of days before the trial.
Yeah, and you can get that on Amazon. I know, because I checked.
Yep.
So if anybody wants to learn more about that, make sure you check in. And I'm definitely, I've got to take a look, because I like when people do a ton of research before they release a book. Like that's my thing. I'm a research guy.
Yeah.
Boots on the ground.
Well, and the more research I do, the more questions I have, right? It's never ending.
Right. Yeah.
It just doesn't stop in this case.
There are layers and layers and layers, and rabbit holes and rabbit holes and rabbit holes.
And things I think I've worked out in my mind that I think I understand, like Charles' murder. Up until the other day, I had it pretty well figured out in my head how that all happened. And now I have new information, and I'm rethinking that. Now I don't understand anymore how that happened.
You mean based on the testimony that we've heard at trial?
Well, testimony heard in the trial and some other information that's come to light that I've gotten, that was given to me, makes me, I thought that Charles went into that house and was ambushed. That's the conclusion I'd come to. Like, he walked in the door, turned the corner, and bam, bam, pretty much just like that. But it turns out that his bladder was so empty that he had to have just gone to the bathroom. And also, he had abrasions on his body that indicate there was a scuffle. I had convinced myself that that didn't happen. I thought he just walked in the door and Alex shot him. But and also from the testimony and from I don't know, just it's just confusing. I'm not sure where to go with all this yet. I hope we learn more next week.
Yeah, the state still has some expert witnesses to bring forth, and some, like the medical. We haven't heard from the medical examiner. There's still more than a handful of police officers we haven't heard from Chandler PD. I mean, we've heard from a handful, but we also haven't heard from a handful yet.
Yeah, next week's going to be interesting, and I have a lot of questions that need to be answered still on that. Just that particular episode, that couple of minutes there in Lori's house. Actually, Charles's house.
Yeah, and so let's start talking about the trial now. I mean, we already started talking about it, but let's go back to jury selection, which was when I met you and we sat, next to each other and watched that. What was your experience during jury selection versus what went on in this trial for jury selection? Was it just pretty similar situation?
Totally different. In Idaho, our jury selection process took 2 weeks. We filled out a lot of questionnaires, and then we'd be called into the jury room and fill out more questionnaires, and then we'd get called into court and be asked questions as a group, and then we'd be called into court and asked questions individually. And then the whole process, I forget what they call it, where so each side can release 12 prospective jurors without any reason. That went on for hours in our trial. And that's one thing I liked about the Arizona method of doing it is theirs was a lot more, it was just quicker. That part was okay. Because in ours, the attorney on the prosecution side would write down a juror's name and hand it to the bailiff. The bailiff would walk it up to the judge would look at it, hand it back to the bailiff would walk over to the defense, and then a return trip,
Oh my gosh.
and it took forever. This time they just put on the
Gosh.
headphones and the white noise, and they went through that process really fast, which I thought that was
Right.
good.
Right.
Um,
And they had gone through the juror questionnaires before that,
right.
beforehand. So
Yeah.
I think that's when they did their strike process, because we never saw any automatic strikes from either side. So
Right.
I think back when they were going through the juror questionnaires, there were 200. They put out 200 of them. They ended up with a pool of 55. I think that's when they did their strike process, was behind the scenes
Yeah.
before they ever called the jury in.
Right. And they did that so fast, and they picked out of, I think you said 55. That was the
Mhm.
pool they picked out of, and they ended up with 16 out of just that pool. They went
Yeah.
through the whole 2,000, give or take. I don't know the exact number, but they went through the whole 2,000 jurors in that process in hours. And they were a lot more selective. And that, I think, that's started to be a problem when we saw 2 jurors right after trial started. It was kind of too late for them to claim it was a hardship at that point, but they did it anyway.
Right.
And so 2 jurors down, that's a little concerning.
Yeah. 2 in 2 days. that's
Yeah.
that's a problem. That's
Yeah.
problematic.
It is. Now, what if there's a flu or something that goes through the jury, or, a lot of things can happen. You only have 2
Yeah.
alternates. There's so much at
Yeah.
stake here. The families, everybody involved in this, they just want it done. They don't want to have to go through this again.
So maybe a little too quick, maybe.
I think very much. Yeah, very much too quick. They were not near selective enough, and they should have driven home what these jurors were in for over and over and over again, and given them more opportunity to think about it and say, no,
Yeah.
this actually is a hardship for me.
Yeah, they reserved that entire right side of the gallery for the jurors, and then they brought the 16 up. Well, there were 17, and out of that 17 that they put in the jury box, they let that one gal go, and then they
Yeah.
let everybody in the gallery go. Just boom. There were what, like 30 or 40 over there? Well,
Yeah.
not 40. There would have been maybe 30 over there.
Yeah, I was shocked at that. They didn't even go through those people. They just picked 16 out of the first pool, and that was good to go.
Yeah, apparently not.
Yeah, and then they're all just wandering around during lunch breaks or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was totally different for us. We were totally isolated from everybody. We're sitting there, media people or whoever, we're sitting there having conversations during lunch break or whatever, and I'll look over and, oh, shoot, there's a juror right there, and better be careful
Yeah.
what you say.
Well, and Vincent came out. Vincent is the information officer, the public information officer for the court. And he came out one day and he's like, hey, I just want to make you guys aware that the jury room is right there. They might be able to hear you. So just, try not to talk about the trial. And I'm like, are you kidding me? That's what we're here for.
Especially in a case like this, right, where there's so much to talk about, and you can't help but talk about it during breaks because there's so much to try to figure out and understand, and everybody has a little different idea of what they heard. And so during a break, you all get together and you talk about it and you work it out.
Yeah.
So anyway, 13 men and 1 woman now, I think it is. No,
Maybe 12 and 2 now. It was 13 and 3, and I think we lost 1 of each. I think we're 12 and 2 now.
Yeah, so 12 and 2, and I think that's just a product of doing it so fast. They didn't stop to think, well, we have kind of an overwhelming amount of men on this jury.
Yeah, and so I wonder about 2 things in that. First of all, I think that the pool of 55 was fairly close along that lines. It was definitely predominantly male out of the 55, but I'm wondering if to get from 200 to 55, if Lori didn't just strike 12 women, if she used her 12 strikes on 12 women. It's like, no.
Right, we don't know. That absolutely could have happened.
Yeah. All right, so we're going through the trial now, and I have some questions, and you and I have talked about this, about the police investigation.
The police investigation in Arizona?
Yes, in Arizona. Because you said in the Idaho trial that part of what brought you in from not wanting to be there to being there fully and being committed to it and wanting to do your duty was the thoroughness of the police investigation, right?
Yes.
And I think we're seeing something a little bit different in the Arizona case by the Chandler PD so far.
Yeah, and I'm going to hold off on giving my opinion about that. I'm not ready for that yet.
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
starting to develop an opinion, and I've had my suspicions for a long time. But they're not done. I want to give them the benefit
Sure.
of the doubt on that.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I have questions about the DNA, why they declared it not a DNA sensitive scene, and the guys on scene did not collect any DNA evidence. I have a problem with that.
Right, and I don't mind talking about the questions that I have right now. I just don't want to give opinions about it. But I have a lot of questions. So one of the pictures that we saw in court was Alex's gun bag. And in that gun bag, there were wipes and gloves. And they didn't say anything about looking in the trash or in Alex's truck or, anywhere for, like bloody rags or any of that stuff. And maybe that's yet to come. I'm not sure. But I hope they asked. Because to me, what I saw there was, okay, so this is a totally premeditated thing. They were prepared here. And I wonder, did they test the gun for fingerprints? I don't think that came up in the testimony we've seen so far, right?
I didn't. I haven't seen anything about testing it for fingerprints or DNA. I know for a fact it wasn't tested for DNA, at least not by the investigators on scene, and I don't think for fingerprints either that we've heard in any testimony so far. Like I said, we still have some Chandler PD people to testify, so maybe we'll see that later and they can help.
Hopefully we'll hear about that, because there's, some people have the idea that maybe Lori took the second shot, which would put her fingerprints probably on the gun unless they cleaned it. But, the whole scene just looked staged to me. And what it reminded me of is sitting through the first trial and Tammy's bedroom. And she had her homeopathic medications right on the bedside table, just stuff like that. It just felt staged to me. And this kind of has that same feel.
Yeah.
The other thing, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, the other thing I was going to say, we listened for, I don't know, seemed like hours, seemed like days to the fingerprint expert, the latent fingerprint expert. And then there wasn't really any conclusive thing there. But the one thing that it did raise in my mind was that supposedly Tylee was kind of poking at Charles with the bat and he grabbed it, which would have meant that most likely she would have been holding the handle end and he would have grabbed the barrel. The barrel would have been smooth and there would have been fingerprints on the barrel, Charles' fingerprints, and they didn't say that was there. So that was interesting to me.
Yeah, she found two prints and both of them were inconclusive.
Yeah.
Which means she couldn't include or exclude Charles, but she didn't test those prints against Lori's or Tylee's or Alex's.
Right. Yeah.
And the reason why she didn't was because she wasn't asked to.
Yeah. Why? Why?
Yeah. Why? Why didn't they test any of their hands for gunshot residue? They can do the paraffin test to find out if you recently fired a weapon. They didn't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have questions. Chat has some questions too. We'll get to those in a minute here, guys. How do you feel about the pace of the trial so far?
It seems like it's going fast, right?
Yeah.
Other than that fingerprint expert.
Right. And 3/4 of her testimony was just general procedural testimony, like telling what she does in every single thing that she investigates, not in this case, although she probably followed those procedures in this case. She's like, well, when I get evidence, this is what I do with it, and this is what I do with it, and then this is what I do with it. And
right. And I get that. We sat through a lot of that in the other trials too, where somebody would have to give their background and give you a little bit of understanding about what they do. I think we could do with a lot less of that. Just get to the point, but there's some legal.
If they have been accepted as an expert witness by both sides, then I think
Yeah.
we don't need to necessarily hear those details.
Right. I trust that you're the expert. Give me your opinion. That's what I need.
Right. Right. As far as staging goes, yeah, the bat was by his right hand. There is a little bit of dispute between the state and Lori's testimony that so Kay Woodcock testified that he batted and so he pitched and batted left-handed, which means that if he had the bat up over his head and just whacked Alex with it, it should be on his left side.
Right. It would be on the other
Logically.
side of his head. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I checked with his brother Jerry on that too, and he told me, yeah, Charles.
Oh,
always,
really?
Yeah, Charles, and he played baseball with Charles, and he said Charles always batted left.
That's funny because Lori said in her opening, the evidence will show that he batted right-handed even though he pitched left-handed.
Right. No, that's not the case. Lori says a lot of things that aren't the truth.
Yeah, she has a lot of evidence to bring into the conversation because she said the evidence will show about 43 times.
And what evidence has she brought in? Well, it's not her turn yet. I get that, but I don't really expect her to bring a lot of evidence in anyway.
No, and she doesn't have very many witnesses. So when she doesn't cross-examine, so she has declined to cross-examine 2 witnesses now, right?
Yeah.
She declined to cross-examine Serena. And was it the fingerprint expert that she also didn't cross-examine?
I can't remember. Probably.
Yeah.
Thankfully, she didn't. She didn't spend a lot of time with Kay really, or Adam either.
No.
I thought she would spend a little more time with them, but I think she knows when it's time for her to be quiet. At least when she has nothing to gain.
Sometimes.
Yeah, as I said that, I thought, no, that's not right.
Yeah, and of course, go ahead.
I was just going to say, but she, in those 2 instances at least, I think she could tell that it was losing battle there. She wasn't going to get anywhere with them.
Yeah, they had the upper hand for sure.
Yeah, she didn't want to give them the opportunity to tell more truth that they know.
Right. No, she wanted to come at Nancy Jo. She's been waiting to come at Nancy Jo for probably years. And she kind of came at Serena a little bit too.
Yeah.
No. Right. Yeah. She asked Serena if she knew who the 3 Nephites were.
And, yeah, we get interesting there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Getting into that translated being argument. And she actually had so Trina objected to that, and Lori actually had a good argument to that objection. She said, well, I'm being accused of being outside of, standard Mormon doctrine. And I'm sitting here showing you examples of stuff, that the church teaches. That's what she asked Serena. Did you learn about those in church? And yeah. So the judge allowed it.
It is in the doctrine. That's true.
Yep. Which leads us down that fringe beliefs path again, down the weird cult offshoots.
There's so much of it, and so much of that stuff is in Mormon doctrine. Just opportunities for people to use it in the wrong way. It's all there. And the fundamentalist groups, the FLDS, and Warren Jeffs, all those guys, and
even like Jody and Ruby.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just so disturbing. So disturbing.
It is, and that's the thing, right? There's so many more of these people out there, and they aren't all murderers. They aren't all horrible child abusers, but they're all taking advantage of, I guess, more naive people, or people who are looking for answers outside the church. They're all taking advantage of that. And to me, it's like, if you claim that you have some magical cure for cancer, energy healing or whatever, and you talk somebody into letting you be their healer because of that, and they don't go get, legitimate treatment, you're hurting that person. You're taking away their chance to possibly get healed and treated in a known way for some hocus pocus kind of stuff. So, and that's the least of it, right? Those are people that are just, getting rich off of it or whatever, using it for their own personal gain in that way. And then the extreme is Chad and Lori. But if you go down the line, there's a lot of extremes actually. Ervil LeBaron and Warren Jeffs and I don't know. There's a bunch of other guys.
Yeah, but and it's not just limited to the LDS Church. I mean, there are other churches that practice faith healing and have neglected their children's health in the name of, believing in their local church's faith healing powers.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So where do you see the trial going when it comes to Lori's turn?
Kind of nowhere. Like I don't really think I don't think she's gonna have much to offer, right? I don't think she's gonna bring in many or maybe not any witnesses. I'm not sure what her witness list is at this point, but I've just been kind of waiting for her to just crack. She keeps going back to whenever she's done with her cross-examination. I forget her exact words, but did you actually see me, hear me, witness me, whatever, conspire to commit murder? And the answer always is no, because nobody actually, just like in all the two prior trials, there is no smoking gun. There's no witness that can say, yes, I heard her clearly say she was going to do this. It's just a mountain of circumstantial evidence that can only lead to one conclusion.
Right. Yeah, and that's kind of her mic drop moment, because that's her last question for all three of those witnesses. Serena and Adam and Kay.
Yeah.
Did you see, hear, witness? No. And then she turns around and saunters back to her desk like she just had a mic drop moment, and we're like,
yeah. And my guess is that that's going to be her defense, right? She's going to, at the end of the trial, or when the prosecution is done and it becomes her turn, she's going to say, Your Honor, I don't feel like the prosecution has proven their case. They haven't brought in one witness that's witnessed or heard me conspire to murder my husband. So the defense rests.
Yeah, I think Serena's testimony is one of the best at poking holes in that right now, because of Alex being at that women's gathering and saying multiple times, I just wish I could kill Charles. I mean, they were thinking about it well in advance of when it actually happened.
Yeah.
I don't know if the Nephi thing is going to ring true with the jury. Maybe if there is LDS or two in the jury, maybe that will for the prosecution, because that's a prosecution thing. Prosecution has the text that say either from her or from Alex, I'm going to be like Nephi, which is the justified killing thing.
Well, there is that one thing, like I'm going to kill him like Nephi killed her, whatever it was that she said. I wanted to, or I wish I could. I can't remember how it was exactly put.
Yeah.
But there's going to be so many other kind of coded texts, and just the fact that they're communicating at particular times. And like in Lori's trial, or first trial in Idaho, it was where people were when. Also, that became really damning. Alex was where they found JJ on the night that they suspected that JJ was murdered, and things like that. You can't.
Right. The phone pings put them there. That was really strong evidence.
Yeah.
But we already know that Lori and Alex were in the house when Charles was shot. So phone pings aren't going to help that.
Well, no, but leading up to it, the actual conspiring, and setting this whole thing up, I think there's going to be. They talked about some of these things in the prior trials. I can't remember exactly what they were, but they're going to come up. We're going to find out. They were talking different times leading up to this, and kind of using their code language to plan it all out.
Yeah, right. So I guess then the question is going to be, can the state make that leap from coded language to conspiracy, like beyond a reasonable doubt? Do you believe beyond a reasonable doubt that this coded language is them conspiring to kill Charles?
Right.
I haven't seen that yet, one way or the other. I mean, it's up to the state to prove that and prove it from, like you said, a mountain of circumstantial evidence. And like Kay said, I've seen a ton of evidence.
Yeah, that's what it always boils down to in this case. It's just an accumulation of evidence that points to one thing.
So we start going through some questions from the audience, from my community. All right. Oops. I think we're stepping on each other. So this is from Rachel. What was it like learning about all the things involved with this case, the one in Chandler, after you served as a juror up in Idaho, with all the people and complexities?
Okay, so it sounds like she's asking about what I learned after the trial. And I learned a lot after the trial. When the trial was over, I was still in the dark about so many things. I listened to every bit of the testimony. I didn't miss a bit of it. I tried to comprehend it all as we were going through, but I felt like the stupid kid in math class. And talking to other jurors after the trial was over, they all felt the same way. But it was really hard to follow a lot of it and hard to understand. So I, going to the sentencing after I decided to write my book, I immediately met Kay and Larry and a lot of people in the media and started asking questions. And so I learned a lot. And so what it was like for me, it was healing for me. It was really informative, and it made me even more determined that I needed to write about it and tell the story.
So that was part of your healing process, was
Yeah,
writing the book.
It really was. I'll tell this story, just short story. I drove from Boise to Rexburg. It's like a 4.5-hour drive. My wife had planned to come with me, but she decided not to at the last minute because our grandson was just about to be born, and she was afraid we'd be gone. And as it turns out, it did happen while I was gone. But anyway, I was by myself. When I was coming into Rexburg, I thought, I really ought to drive by the property, Chad's property, and see that for myself. I've never done that. So I, put that in my navigator and drove out there, and I pulled out in this little turnout across from his house and just looked across the street over at it all, and I could see the dry pond and the burn pit and the cozy cone and all those things. And, I just was so, I was just devastated sitting there by myself. And so I thought, well, I sat there for a while and thought, well, that was stupid. I don't know why I did that. It just made me feel even worse. And then I drove back to my hotel, and when I walked in, 2 other jurors were there, and they'd come to see the sentencing also. And they were like, "Oh, we want to go out to Chad's property and see that." And I was like, "Oh, I don't, I just went out there." But they wanted to go, and I didn't want them to go by themselves. So I said, "All right." So we went back out there. This time when we went out there, I pulled over in the same turnout, and there had been, just in the hour or two that I was gone, there had been like a memorial wall built, and there was media out there, and there were a bunch of people standing around. And so we got out of the car, we walked up, and I could see, I hadn't met Kay or Larry yet, or anybody yet. And they were there, and they were talking to the media. And as soon as they got done, they came up and they hugged us and thanked us for our service on the jury. And we were just so warm and welcoming that it just turned everything around for me, just in that moment, that they were so appreciative and thankful. And it just kind of made me feel honored.
Wow. So it all turned around like in an hour or two from going to the site by yourself and then coming back to the site. Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. That is amazing. All right. Now a question from Simi. She says, was there one particular thing or things that made you sure of Lori's guilt in Idaho?
I get asked that question all the time, and the answer is no. There's not one particular thing, and I don't think there is in any of these cases, any of these trials in this case. Like I said before, it's just a compilation of all of the evidence massed together. And I think about halfway through the trial, maybe a little less than that, is when I started to be convinced, like, okay, these guys have proven their case to me. I've seen enough to know. And it's kind of hard because you have your emotional side and your pragmatic side. And as a juror, you have to separate those two things out. Emotionally, I was convinced pretty early on. You look at the pictures, and we had to see the pictures of the remains after they'd been exhumed and all of that stuff. And it's so hard to look at it. And so emotionally, to me, at the very least, this mother allowed her children to be killed and then lied about it. That much was absolutely sure. But my pragmatic side had to make the prosecution prove that to me, that she did that. And so about halfway through, I'd seen enough evidence to where I felt like beyond a reasonable doubt she was guilty.
Yeah, and you know what, the thing about being in the social media side of things, having a YouTube channel, a true crime YouTube channel, is on these big cases, the community gets divided very early on. And they obviously get divided on their emotional side because they get so, I don't know what the word is, but they can get ugly if you disagree with them and just say this. Pragmatically, I don't believe that the state has necessarily proved their case yet. Emotionally, yes, I'm leaning that way. Emotionally, I believe that, Brian Koberger is probably guilty and Karen Reed is probably innocent and Lori is definitely guilty. I believe all those emotionally, but pragmatically, the justice system has to see its way to the end of this. And I'm one of those people who will not get into camp until it's legally been proven to me.
I am too. And I think when you're a juror, you're put into a position where you have to think about those things, right? Like I had to think about, I need to divide my brain here. I had to actually think that out and make them prove it. And here too, it's really interesting that they get to ask questions. We kind of did too. Like if the jury had questions, if a juror had questions, you could write a note and hand it to the bailiff, not during court, but like when we were sitting in the jury room. We weren't allowed to discuss the case with each other, but if I as an individual had a question, I could have given it to the bailiff and he would have taken it to Judge Boyce. But here they get to actually, when the witness is on the stand, they can ask that witness a question. And I wish they were taking advantage of that. I would have loved to do that. They would have probably never gotten through the trial because I had so many questions.
Right.
It would have been really nice to be able to do that.
It is shocking to me how few juror questions there are in this. I have all kinds of questions too.
Yeah, is it because they actually know more than they admit to? Like maybe they already know about JJ and Tylee, or is it because they have no idea to ask about that?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. That's a very good question. Like, are they just totally lost? I don't think they're totally lost. I see most of them paying pretty decent attention.
Yeah.
Juror number 8 on the top on the right side, I think he gets a little bored and he doesn't pay as close attention as some of the other jurors. Like I'll see him like leaning like this and I'll be like, oh no, stay awake, dude. Stay awake.
He might have been sleeping at one point. They have to develop a strategy for that because it is hard to sit there and you want to at least appear to be interested. And there was some of the testimony when I was a juror that I wasn't honestly all that interested in the background of it all. I just wanted them to get to the gist of, what they were saying. And it was hard to stay awake sometimes, but I had my juror next to me had instructions that if she caught me nodding off, she was to nudge me. And that might have happened a few times. As horrible as the case was and as interesting as it all was, there were times it was hard to stay awake.
Yeah, it is for us in the gallery too, especially when a fingerprint expert goes on for an hour. This leads us to a good question though. So Squeegee of Justice, that's my friend over on Trial TV Live. We do our nightly recaps of every day of the trial.
What is a Squeegee of Justice?
There's a story behind that. We won't get into it now. Thoughts on the jury allowed to have their cell phones during trial?
Yeah, I think that's just really weird. I mean, they could be communicating on their cell phones. They could be recording something for all we know. They
Yeah.
were a lot more restrictive about that for the jury, for sure. We weren't allowed to bring our cell phones into the courtroom, and people in the gallery too. They were allowed to have their phones and their computers, but they were very restricted on what they could do with them.
Yeah, it's and Juror 15 has had 2 issues with his phone in court. He had that little electronic noise thing that went on that interrupted court that one day for about 30 seconds.
So that was the same
And
guy.
then, yeah, same guy also was on his phone during testimony. I think it was Captain Killer's testimony, and he got called in front of the judge, and judge is like, "You were on your phone?" He's like, "Oh yeah, I was texting my daughter." Judge didn't ask to see his phone. I mean, nothing. He's just like, "All right, better turn that off."
That's crazy to me. That's just crazy.
Especially when that's the guy that had like 4 really detailed medical questions. Like he's the one that submitted those detailed medical questions for juror questions, like from Captain Killer. So were you really just texting your daughter? If I'm the judge, I want to see your phone like now.
Yeah. Well, and that's the fear, right? I mean, all that leads to a mistrial.
Yeah. Right. And losing all of your alternates plus 1 would be another mistrial.
Yeah.
We're down to 2. We're down to 2 alternates in the first week.
Yeah. It seems very dangerous to me.
Travelin' Teresa says it's really hard, in my opinion, for them to prosecute this case while trying to tiptoe around the Idaho case. All the things not allowed in because of hearsay, etc. It seems to be working around it pretty well so far. I think I've seen most of the evidence we've seen has been from the Chandler case. I haven't seen a whole lot from the Idaho case.
Well, it happened first, right? Everything that came after in Idaho happened after Charles was murdered.
Right.
But still, you know, there are things that happen in Idaho that are, I would think, would be evidence in this case, like the fact that Lori is a convicted killer. That seems important to me. I don't know why the jury can't know that. I think they should know.
Yeah, right. I think they can learn that she is a convicted felon and not know what she was convicted for, and that she has at least 2 felonies, but the exact amount is not. So the judge came up with those rules like early on in this. That is interesting.
Yeah, and they have their reasons, and they're a lot smarter and more knowledgeable about the law than I am. But that seems like the biggest piece of evidence in this case to me.
Right. But you can't prejudice the jurors. You can't make them think she's guilty just of this because she's guilty of something else. So that's what a good defense attorney would argue, is that it prejudices the jury.
Yeah, and I would agree with that if she wasn't yet convicted there. But since she's been convicted and proven to be a murderer, she's a murderer.
She is. All right, from C. Lisa or Clesa. Do you think the jurors are wondering about the kids, or are they overwhelmed by the deluge of other evidence, information coming in?
Yeah, probably both. I think they are a little bit overwhelmed at this point, and it's going to become more clear in their minds as it goes on. One thing I've learned sitting through these 3 trials is, you know, the prosecution will present something or whatever, and it won't be cleared up, and you'll be thinking, oh, you know, I didn't quite get that, everything I needed there, but they'll bring something in later that'll make it come together for you. So I think there's going to be that for the jury. But at some point, they have to start wondering about JJ and Tylee, right? Where are they? Why aren't they here?
Right.
Why isn't Alex testifying? Did they say that Alex died? I can't remember. They brought that up.
I don't think I've heard that in testimony yet. No.
Yeah, so they got to be wondering, and I'm waiting for them to ask that question. Write it down on a piece of paper and put it in the basket, and let's ask a witness.
Right. Of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people that were in the house that day, July 11th, 2019, 4 of those 5 are currently deceased. So at some point, does the jury not wonder that?
Right, and let's at least hear that much of it. Like 4 of those people are now deceased.
Yeah.
And let the jury figure it out for themselves.
What are your thoughts on the upcoming defense witnesses? Will Lori be quick at this portion of the trial? My thought is it's going to go fast.
So the upcoming witnesses, I haven't really looked at who's coming up. I'm assuming that it's going to be police officers testifying more about what happened on that day, I guess. But,
Yeah, that'll be the state's witnesses. She's asking about particularly defense witnesses.
oh, defense witnesses, yeah.
Yeah. I don't think we know that yet. I don't think we know who all her acceptable witnesses are, because there have been issues about her providing the list in a timely fashion to the state and allowing the state to contact them and get a statement from them, interview them. So I don't think we know yet.
Yeah, her big expert witness that she keeps bringing up and keeps getting denied. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, I can't see how it is. I mean, her argument was, and this was in the pre-trial hearings. Lonnie Dworkin is her expert witness. He's the one that's doing the Celebrite extraction on Charles's phone, and so he gets paid for by public funds because she is an indigent defendant. She got approved for 10 hours of his time. He did an extraction on the phone, but he didn't get approved for her to use him until March 7th, which is less than 30 days before the trial. So it does not follow the rules of evidence, because the state doesn't have enough time to look at his report and to rebut that report, or come up with her own expert witness to rebut that report. So the state's going to object to it. And in the hearing, and Trina K said this in the next hearing after that hearing, the judge said, well, you have two choices here. If you want to get Lonnie Dworkin in, you can file for a continuance in this. And Lori said, nope, I don't want a continuance. So the judge is going to be like, well, you don't get your expert in then. Maybe he'll get in the Brandon Boudreaux, trial later. But the state's not going to not object to Lonnie Dworkin's evidence coming in.
Yeah, exactly. And then her, she was going to bring in some family members, I think. I don't know if that's still on the...
I think her mom and dad are on the witness list. I can't remember if her sister Summer is. Summer might be on that witness list too.
Yeah. I think she's just hoping to show the jury that she's a victim. Everything's against her. She can't say, she can't say to the jury, well, I spent 23 hours a day on lockdown.
Right. Why is that, young lady? So Micah says, Colby alleges that Lori gave finger guns towards Alex in court. Did you all see that? I didn't see that.
Yeah, I heard that too. I had to go back and look. And what I saw was she had her pen in her hand, kind of like if I had hair. She had her pen in her hand and she just did this. That's all that was. There was no
people
finger
making something out of nothing.
Yeah, I think that's what that was.
Question, how does law enforcement investigation compare in each case? I think we kind of talked about this. Tom is still out. He's not going to form an opinion about the Chandler PD's investigation in this case yet. Yeah. He has questions. We talked about his questions, my questions. Yeah. And I guess we'll see, since we still have some state's witnesses from Chandler PD to get on the stand.
I will say, I will talk about the Idaho law enforcement, and the FBI, everybody involved in the first two trials. Top-notch people did their jobs really well on every level, worked together really well. I've gotten to know a lot of them since my trial ended. The one that I was a juror in ended. And those people are dedicated, like beyond dedicated to what they do, especially in this case, right? Because it was such a horrific case involving children, and they were all over it before they knew that Kylie and JJ were dead, hoping to find them alive. And once they found them not alive, they've been dedicated to getting justice for like 5 years now. Over 5 years now, they've been living this.
Wow. So at some point in this, Lisa says, Lori says there's video evidence of Charles getting physical with Tylee. So wonder if she will present that in court, if there's anything to that.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything to that. I've gotten to know Charles' family really well, and other people who knew Charles. And Charles was a big guy. He's a jock, always the popular guy. But everybody says he never, ever provoked anybody, never had a mean bone in his body. He was the most gentle, kind person. And you hear that and you think, okay, sounds almost inhuman. But after hearing that from so many different people that knew him, some of whom have no skin in the game to make him sound better than he was or anything like that, he was just a really gentle guy. So I think his relationship with Tylee was stressed because Tylee was a teenager and he was a stepfather, and that's probably always going to be stressed. But he loved Tylee. He bought her Jeep. He helped her buy her Jeep. He helped her get insurance for it. She was one of the few solid things in his life. Colby says the same thing. He was doing everything he could to be a good father. So I don't think she's going to come up with anything other than, the typical arguments you might have. Getting physical with Tylee, I don't know. I mean, Tylee was kind of a mess, I know. She was a teenager. She was Lori's daughter. She was really horribly influenced by Lori. I've spent a lot of time on Tylee, thinking about Tylee and what her life was like. And Lori made Tylee's life hard. And so if there was anything between Charles and Tylee, I think it was probably put there by Lori. Just like I wonder about Tylee's health. I think if Tylee had issues health-wise, those issues might have come right from Lori. I don't know that. I don't have any proof of that or anything, but that's just kind of where my mind has gone.
Seems like it wouldn't be out of the question. And didn't we hear from Adam about Tylee's relationship with Charles, or was it Kay that said, yeah, they had their their moments of conflict, but they also had good times together. And Lori had her issues with her ex. And was that Adam or was that Kay? I can't remember now. Whoever was it said Tylee had a lot of things going on in her life.
It was Kay who said that.
Yeah.
She had a little bit of issues with Charles.
And Colby was sitting right in front of me to my left. And I could see him shake his head yes in affirmation that Tylee had a lot of things going on in her life.
Yeah.
So that's confirmation enough for me, because he knew, that's his little sister, and he knew what things she had going on in her life very well. He's very familiar with those.
Yeah. I haven't had an opportunity to have a conversation with Colby. Our paths just haven't crossed, and I've talked to so many other people in the family, but he's one I would like to have a conversation with at some point.
Yeah. Tom, what did you think when Lori didn't have a defense in her Idaho trial?
Sitting there as a juror, my thought was, well, there was nothing they could bring up that was going to help. There was no evidence they could have brought into court that was going to help her case. Knowing what I know now, since I've learned so much more about the case, I realize for sure there wasn't any helping her. She wouldn't allow them to do anything anyway. She wasn't going to allow them to bring Chad into it. And then Judge Boyce would not allow her attorneys to bring her sanity into it. They couldn't even talk about her sanity in the trial. So their hands were totally tied. And those guys, they're legit defense attorneys, both of them. Looking into their background after the trial was over, I've learned a lot about them. And they have a really strong history of being defense lawyers. And if anybody could have defended her, it was those two guys. And I didn't know that necessarily during the trial, but I do now. And I think getting the death penalty, in fact, they wouldn't talk to me after the trial. They were very kind, nice. They introduced themselves to me when they met me after the trial and thanked me for my service as a juror. So they were very gracious, but they just didn't feel like it would be their place to talk about it because of appeals and stuff like that. But their hands were just totally tied. And the one thing they did say to me was that they felt getting the death penalty off the table was a win for them. And that's pretty much all they were ever going to be able to do. That, and you have to give somebody their day in court and give them due process. They felt like they were able to do that for her. and get the death penalty off the table.
So how do you think that led to Lori wanting to represent herself now? That she can control the game, she can control what she brings in and what she doesn't, and who she asks to come in and who she doesn't want to come in?
Well, I think
Like
if anything, those two guys would have convinced her to have attorneys represent her. But I think other experiences that she's had with other attorneys has been really negative for her. You know, she's not able to get her way, say the things the way she wants to say them, defend herself in the way she wants to defend herself. And she's been frustrated with that.
Yeah, her current advisory council team is her second defense team in this case.
Yeah.
And she had to have two different doctors evaluate her for competency back last fall. So it's interesting to me. I don't like that defense team. I don't like that doctor. I want somebody else.
Yeah.
And now that Pam Hicks is one of her advisory council, so Pam was with her through all of the pre-trial trial, sitting right by her side, like working her through it. She was there from the day that she was appointed to represent herself and before that. And Lori just kept pushing her more and more to the side. So now she doesn't even sit next to her, and she rarely consults with her as advisory council. And I'm curious if that's also like a personality conflict type of thing.
It is, but well, because Lori is such a narcissist. She thinks that she's going to be able to go in there. And I understand that she's not wrong when she says nobody understands this case as well as I do, right? Because she believes that she's a translated being. She believes these things, and she's not going to convince her lawyers of these things. So she's not wrong in that regard, but she does not understand the law any better than I do. Maybe a little better than I do, but not much. And so that puts her in no good position to actually comport herself in a trial.
Yeah.
That would be impossible. And I get her frustration. Like some of her arguments, I would be making those arguments too. Why can't I say this? Why can't I ask this question? Because there's rules, and the rules are there for a reason, and it is very frustrating.
Yep, there's the rules of evidence, the rules of procedure, and there's another one in there somewhere that she does not understand, comprehend fully.
Yeah. And it's not that I understand those rules either, but I know they're there for a reason. Hearsay, hearsay is one that, I've never been able to get somebody to explain to me exactly what hearsay is. I get that it's somebody said that somebody said something, but it's a lot more complicated than that legally. And some of the things that you can't say because it's said to be hearsay, I'm thinking, why? That doesn't make any sense to me. But legally,
like a police report is hearsay. Some of those forensic experts' reports are hearsay, so they can't sit down on the witness stand and read from them verbatim. That's why they say, would it help to refresh your memory if you read this? So you read this, and then I'll ask you your questions and see if your memory is refreshed. And most of the times those witnesses will say, yes, my memory is refreshed. Here's the answer to your question. But I've actually seen a couple of times where they'll go, you know what? I don't remember this at all. This does not refresh my memory.
Yeah.
I'm like, oops.
Yeah.
All right. Next question. Do you think she'll accidentally open the door to have her children asked about? She had that opportunity with Nancy Jo, and she asked to go to lunch. She said, I have a lot more questions for this witness, after she almost opened that door. And when we came back from lunch, she didn't ask that question again.
Yeah, she totally changed her tack, and I was really hoping she would stay on that line. But
yeah, me too.
Yeah, she might open the door, though. I mean, there's still going to be plenty of opportunity for her to make that mistake.
Yeah. Especially when she testifies on her own behalf, because she's going to. I believe very strongly that she's going to. Yeah. Because she wants to have her say. She wants to have her say.
I hope you're right. Yeah, she'll say a lot of things. That, she'll get cross-examined on all those things, and that's going to be really hard for her.
Why do you think the majority of jurors are not writing notes? That's a good question. I see probably about a fourth of them taking notes on a regular basis.
Yeah. I don't know. I took a lot of notes. Yeah, I did. I took a lot of notes. Partway through the trial, I realized there are other people taking notes. And when I sit down to deliberate, you know how some people are they just take notes. Like every word said, they're writing down. We had a few of those. And so I thought there's probably no reason for me to take notes, but I wanted my own notes. So I started, instead of trying to write down everything every point that was made. I tried to write down the ones that were more important to me. But I did take notes, and we had some jurors that weren't taking notes, and maybe they're just better at retaining what they hear. I don't know. I don't think it's a critical thing to take notes. I don't think that it means they're not as responsible, not as responsible jurors for not taking notes. It's just everybody has their own method.
Right. So it would have been interesting for you to be in those deliberations, because you talk about the emotional and the pragmatic side of us. So how many of the jurors are leaning into the emotional side, and how many are leaning into the pragmatic side? How many are looking at their notes? How many don't have any notes to remember specific things once you get to deliberations?
It's amazing. Well, and the other thing could be that they're not realizing how long this is going to go and how complicated it's going to be. And if that's the case, that's a shame, because they won't have notes to fall back on. And that'll make it hard for them to maybe remember some things.
No, absolutely. I mean, I forget by the end of the day. By the time I get home and we start our daily recap, I'm like, oh wait, what happened today? I mean, I could summarize it in 10 minutes, but now that I have like 15 pages of notes from the day, then I can go and look at my notes, and they refresh my memory. Imagine that.
Yeah, I have a terrible memory anymore. The older I get, the worse it gets.
Right.
This is what it is.
Alexa is my administrative assistant. I have to remind her to remind me of a lot of things.
Yeah.
When should I remind you?
Oh God. she just asked me what I need reminded of.
When should I remind you?
Alexa, stop. She has sensitive ears.
Yeah.
She heard her name.
Yep.
Here's one from Bluebird. Do you think it'll go fast? I feel like she's going to drag it out as long as she can.
I think she's enjoying herself, and I think this is her last hurrah before she gets put away forever, back to Idaho and never seen from again. Even, I don't think Idaho would ever have let her get out to talk to the media. So there's that. But yeah, I think it'll go kind of fast, just because as much as she wants to be in the limelight, I don't think she's going to have much to offer. I think she's going to kind of fall apart a little bit and realize it's pointless.
Yeah, she's got to ride the line between dragging it out too much and opening doors and saying too much and asking too much, that she's got to actually have legal arguments in there for her to drag it out as long as probably she would like to.
Yeah. And my question always is, does she actually want to win? Does she care about that? I mean, the result is the same for her. I understand why we're having this trial and how important it is for the family to get justice. It's important for everybody to have justice. We always need to get justice whenever we possibly can, and need to have everything brought out in these trials and understood and shown on TV and by the media, and everybody needs to know what happened. That's all very important stuff. But as far as Lori's concerned, I don't know if she's just kind of enjoying the.
You see her smiling and not laughing in court, but smiling and, like you said, enjoying herself in court. Just a little too much for somebody who is responsible for what she's responsible for. It's disturbing to me to watch.
It is, yeah, and infuriating.
But yes, infuriating. I'm surprised nobody's jumped over that wooden railing.
You have to give a lot of credit to Adam and Kay, I think, for directly answering her ridiculous questions and not flying after her attack.
You could tell Adam did not want to answer anything in the beginning of that, and eventually he started answering questions more. But in the beginning, he's like, "I don't remember, don't recall, don't remember, don't recall."
Yeah.
He didn't want to be there, and he didn't want to answer her stupid questions, for sure. So, but speaking about justice, okay, you just mentioned this is about getting justice, in this case, particularly for Charles. Do you think that the prosecutor consulted with the family members before pressing these charges and having her extradited from Idaho?
I haven't thought to ask them that. I don't know.
Because
I would imagine.
this is putting them through a lot, and they have to suffer a lot. But on the
Yeah.
other end of it, the light at the end of the tunnel is justice for Charles.
Well, not having asked that question, I think I can say yes, they wanted to have this trial. They want to see justice for Charles. That's extremely important to the family. So I think if they had been given a choice, the answer would have been yes, let's do this. Let's finally get justice for Charles. They've been waiting for a long time, and it's very important to them. Charles was murdered first, and we're getting justice for him last. And like Kay says, that's how Charles would have wanted it. He would have said, take care of the kids first, we'll take care of me later.
Yeah. I feel like vicariously through the family, through doing some lives with Kresha, she's brought JJ to life for me. Like, she shared some videos and some pictures that are just like heartbreaking.
Yeah.
He's such a beautiful little boy, and to have this man in his life who was so generous and kind and adopted him, and he was just, the center of his world, just taken from him.
Yeah.
And then JJ taken from everybody when she moved out to Hawaii, wouldn't let anybody have contact with him. Moving and then going to Rexburg, and what happened up there is just, it's tough.
You really kind of nailed it. You nailed it there, Joe, because it's like, if I had just walked away after my service was over, I wouldn't have gotten to know any of these people, and I wouldn't care so much. But having gotten to know them, you begin to really care. I mean, I started to care as a juror sitting there, but I didn't know the living victims, I call them. I didn't know any of those people. So getting to know them and hearing their stories about JJ and Tylee and Tammy and Charles, and hearing their anguish about it all and seeing it firsthand it's hard. So it is important for them. It's important for those reasons.
It is. And I know the court TV stream everybody gets to watch online, which is a great thing. But being there in court, seeing Kay testify, seeing her break down when she talked about having to call her siblings and tell them, that Alex killed Charles, and he was cremated and his remains were shipped to her business office, is just, it feels more being there in the courtroom. I don't know, maybe people who are watching online felt as horrible about it as I did, but it was just
that one I hadn't heard before Kay said it in court. And that's just, I heard a lot of other things. Charles' sister-in-law told me a lot about the days following Charles' murder and going to his house and finding it being cleaned out. Like the next day, it was cleaned out by Lori. They didn't, they couldn't prove that, but all of his expensive watches were gone, and everything of any value was just gone, which to me points to premeditation. I'm wondering if that's going to come up too. I think they cleaned that house, his apartment or house, whatever it was. I think they cleaned it out.
Maybe the one in Houston.
Either the day they murdered him or allegedly murdered him, or the day before.
Wow. All right, just a couple more questions. Do you think the judge is advising Lori too much?
I think Judge Boreski is doing a great job. Sometimes I think, well, let her hang herself. But on the other hand, he has to get through this trial and have it be a legitimate trial, even though she's trying to represent herself. So it's hard. I think he's advising her for that reason, because he wants to get through this trial and have it count. And the same for the prosecution. I'm sure they could be a lot harder on Lori, but they have to kind of do her job and help her along as much as you would like that to see them do the opposite. They have to do that just to make sure this trial counts.
Yeah. and preserve the record for any appellate issues at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep, he almost has to be over accommodating for her.
Yeah.
All right, one more from the Squeegee of Justice. Are you self-publishing, and where can we find your books?
Well, thank you. Yeah, I am self-publishing. I actually had a publisher for the first book, but we've got the rights to it back, and we're self-publishing it now. A second edition. It has been off of Amazon for a few days now, but we're hoping to have it back on. We're making just a few changes, so we're trying to get that all done and get it back on as quick as we can. So it should be back hopefully next week. The second book is on Amazon. It's available now on Amazon, so that's where you can find it. And we are self-publishing that one also.
So that is the second one you just released before the start of this trial.
Yep.
Chad Daybell, The One Mighty and Strong. And then the first one you published after the first trial, Money, Power, and Sex. So how did you come up with the title Money, Power, and Sex?
Yeah,
I know the answer to this, but
yeah,
I'm
thank
asking.
you for asking that. Yep. Lindsay Blake's first words that I heard as a juror were money, power, and sex. That was her opening statement, and her claim that that was what that trial was going to be about, and that's what we were going to hear. Was for Lori, it was all about money, power, and sex.
All right.
The second one,
Well,
I need to do I have a second to explain the second one?
Oh, no, absolutely. Let me pull it back up. Yeah.
Sorry, I was a little slow there, but the second
Which
one,
way am I?
it seems like people have a little bit of a misunderstanding about the one mighty and strong. Like some people are offended that I would call him that, maybe, but that actually comes from Joseph Smith. One of his prophecies was that one mighty and strong would appear at the time of the second coming of Christ, and Chad thinks that he's that guy.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So there's a little sarcasm in my title there, but that's
Right.
where that comes
Yeah.
from.
People need to understand sarcasm.
Most
Well,
people do.
Lori also thinks that she and Chad are going to be exonerated. So
Oh yeah, yeah. The second coming, even though it didn't happen, what was it supposed to be? July of 2022 or 2020? I don't remember. 2020 it was supposed to happen, but apparently they didn't behave good enough for Jesus to feel like it was time for him to come. So
they didn't gather enough. They didn't gather enough of the 144,000.
Right.
They were sitting in jail. Maybe they can gather some of the inmates around them.
Oh yeah. Well, we're doing that.
Probably so.
Yeah.
Tom, thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Appreciate your insight.
Very nice being here.
And thanks everybody for joining us in chat. I'm going to go and have a little chat with the community here. We'll let you go and get back to whatever you have else going on tonight, this afternoon.
Yeah, we've got a little gathering happening here. So.
All right, nice. Good deal. Thanks again. I look forward to seeing you this week and sharing more thoughts as we see this week's trial.
Thank you, Joe.
All right, thank you. Okay, everybody, I'm going to go check comments now. Boom. Live. Thank you, everybody, for coming in. Appreciate your support and for coming and joining us and being respectful and having great questions, amazing questions, thoughtful questions. Holy cow, there's a whole lot of chat going on in chat. So that was guessing stream is over. You are behind, Sinead. You're behind, but that's okay. You can catch it on Replay Crew. If you're on Replay Crew, make sure you hit the like button and comment below. Shirley, thank you. Kaylee, thank you very much. I appreciate the positive support. Trial TV Live, thank you for joining us. Squeegee of Justice, of course, as always. Lisa, Kikaru. Forrest Nelson, thank you for modding. Dizzy, thank you for modding. I appreciate it. Queen Olive, Rana, Shirley Roth, lots of people in here. I appreciate that. You just missed the cut. 44,001. All right. Boom. That's a good one. I like that. You're probably lucky you weren't 144,000. I'm just saying. Trace on the case, thank you for joining us. Thank you for modding. I appreciate your help. Hi, Britt. All right. Will the second edition of the first book be on Amazon Irish, Amy? I think he didn't have a definitive time on that. He just said they're working on editing it now. Crafts and True Crime, Tracy. Thank you for joining us. I can't go up and mention everybody. We're going to be here till like midnight. Bluebird, it was good to have you in here. Yes, Bluebird, jurors do get to keep their notes, at least through deliberations. I believe after deliberations, those notes get confiscated and probably destroyed. Okay, it's on Kresh's channel. Okay. I wish I knew how to portal everybody over to Kresh's channel, because we should go check that out.
Christmas Lights isn't responding.
Oh, good grief.
Please check its network connection and power supply.
Alexa's always interrupting me. Thank you, Dizzy. I appreciate it. Dizzy's going to set us up to portal over to Kresh's channel. That's Difficult Research. Diffa, capital C-U-L-T, because she does a lot of difficult research into cults, and especially related to the LDS Church. Do you think you'll interview anyone else in the gallery? Oh, I guarantee it. I guarantee it. I'll have another interview for you. I will actually, Trace and I will be attending trial for the next couple of days with someone who was in the Preparing a People circle and knew one of the speakers, Preparing the People, one of the concentric people. And I interviewed her this morning, not on a live stream, but on a recorded. We need to do a little bit of editing, and then we'll release that on Friday after the week of trial. So stay tuned on that. Look for a video release this Friday with someone who was kind enough to do an interview this morning with me. Someone who knew Melanie Gibb, someone who considered herself a friend of Melanie Gibb. All right, so we're going to sign out now. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, mods. Thank you, chat. We will catch you tomorrow night, co-streaming with Trial TV Live. Catch you all on the flip side.
See you soon, my lovely friends. Have a good afternoon. Don't forget to stop back by and see me real soon. Thank you for stopping in. Thanks for saying hi. Together we can make a difference if we try. Thank you for stopping in. Thanks for saying hi. Together we can make a difference if we try. Thanks for saying hi. Together we can make a difference.